Okay, as promised, this is Fluffy 2.0, or the Creature Crate Monster in a Box rebuild that I promised last year. So I made some modifications. I didn't stick to my original plan because I found a better way to do it. So I'll start from the outside. The one thing I had to do was change the how the chain is attached. I had to remove the chain from this ring over here to allow the lid to open up a lot higher. With the chain attached here, the lid could only open like so high. So now I just put it off to this one side off to the side, and that actually worked out good. So let me take this chain off back here. Just open up this lid. Show you what's going on. So as far as modifications go, I did 4 things to this prop. I installed LED eyes on the creature. I completely overhauled the prop controller and installed a new prop controller with much better onboard sound quality, and I'll talk about that in a second. I installed new speakers, which made a huge difference, and then I installed a linear actuator. The actuator is what allows that lid to open up a lot further, and what I did is I made it at the end of the animation. So I'll show you that at the end of the video, what the animation looks like. But let me move the camera and I'll just kind of show you a little bit better view of the guts of this thing. So the first thing I'll explain is the new prop controller, and this made such a huge difference. When I troubleshooted the last prop, I didn't really understand if it was the speakers or the prop controller that was giving me this annoying background hum. Basically, you could hear that the speaker was on and the volume was really loud, but I didn't want to hear that background noise. I wanted the prop totally quiet until someone walked up to it, and that sells the effect, you know? So when I overhauled another prop, my coffin sit-up prop, I put a new controller in it and I used the same speakers, and I found out that the hum went away completely. So it wasn't the speakers, it was the prop controller. So new prop controller, it's the Peekaboo Flex Max, I believe. I'll talk about that in a second here. But I've got the LED eyes just hooked up to the output 7 and 8. They have little squares around the 7 and the 8, which tell you that it's the dimmable LED function that comes with this prop controller, which is really great. The other thing I liked is that there's an expansion slot, so you can connect other components. In this case, I connected a special circuit board, which gave me all the outputs that I needed. Now, all of these outputs here are only 12 to 24 volts DC. But I have 120 volt lamps that come on, so I need to use a different relay, which is available on this board, to actually control that. And I'm using the same board to control the newest part of the mechanism of this prop, which is a linear actuator. So remember, I was thinking about adding something, either a new cam on the motor to allow the lid to open up a lot more than it did, but I talked a little bit in the last video about the complications that you could run into with having a larger cam, because if it stops on the high point of the cam, then your lid's going to be open too much, and you really don't want that. You want the lid to be somewhat closed, even if not all the way closed, until the prop resets and someone comes along and sets it off again. So I went with this linear actuator. It runs on 12 volt DC, and how you control it is you just reverse the polarity to go in and out. This has a 6-inch throw, and these are extremely slow. They do make a little noise, but they're extremely strong. They can lift a ton of weight. And actually, it's sold as a gag pretty good, and again, I'll show that at the end here. But the animation goes forward, and at the very end, this linear actuator drives this up. It's obviously, I'd have to power it up to move it, but it drives this board up, which lifts the lid at the end, so it almost looks like the creature's trying to get out of the crate. But then it stops, and then he kind of goes back into his crate. And the inspiration from that was definitely from the Creepshow movie, where at one point, after Fluffy had killed one of his victims. He dragged him inside of the crate and almost wanted to be safe inside his crate and close the lid up. So it actually works out pretty good. So the other thing I did was I installed new speakers, and if you remember the last video, even though I was videoing the prop and the animation going off with the sound coming out, you could really tell that the sound quality just wasn't there. So it was a combination of the prop controller and just older speakers. So with the new prop controller and the upgraded speakers, it's much better sound quality. It really gives something special to this prop. It sounds really, really good. The roars of the creature are much deeper, and the ambient sound sounds really great too. So the first thing I needed to do was to remove the mask and the gloves. So I'm just using a pretty long screwdriver here. And the mask actually is just sitting on a milk jug. So I have a screw with a really large fender washer that holds that on. So in the back, or on the lid, actually it's not on the lid, it's on the back of the prop, you can see those 4 boards. They're actually screen door closers, and they're independent of the lid, and they just have plastic furniture glides on them so that the lid can glide independently of those boards. And those springs actually help reduce the load on that windshield wiper motor so it doesn't stall out. Then I started the process of removing the eyes. They're just, pretty standard glass eyes on this mask. And I'm just using an X-Acto blade to sort of cut those out. By the way, the wolf mask and the matching hands are about $30 through Spirit Halloween. They've sold this for years because they still have it for sale, and I built this prop well over 10 years ago. Now what I'm using are these clear plastic balls that I got from monsterguts.com. And I'm going to use these as the eyes, and I'll just attach some LEDs to the back of them to make it look like the creature's eyes are glowing. I decided I didn't like the look of such a small opening for the new glowing eyes, so I decided to make the eyes a little bit bigger, almost like they were bulging out. So I'm just cutting a larger opening. Now I'm just taking the pre-wired LEDs and I'm filing it down a little bit to rough up the surface. That does a couple of things. One, it's going to diffuse the light just a little bit, but it's also going to give me a nice flat, rough surface to attach to the balls. You could do this with super glue. I ended up just using hot glue. Now this gives you an idea of what it's going to look like. And this is just a 9 to 12 volt 5mm LED. You can buy them on Amazon or eBay. There's a couple of great stores on eBay that actually sell LEDs pre-wired with the resistor already in there. I used to always solder my own LEDs, and now it's so affordable just to buy the LEDs already pre-wired, and it saves a ton of time. So the reason I am gluing this on with the LED lit is so these balls have like a hemisphere. There's a line that goes around, you can see it. So I wanted to make sure that I got the right look. I didn't want to glue it up and then light it up, having that light shining through that line. It would have looked weird. Now remember, this is a mask, so there's actually 2 eye slits that are cut into the mask so that someone wearing it could see out. So I ended up sealing that up with a little hot glue and decided to use some black acrylic paint to paint that. That way there was no light spillover coming through those eye holes. I just wanted only the eyes to be glowing. Once I was done with that, it was just a matter of reinstalling the mask onto those boards. And I've wired the LEDs in parallel, just means that they're sharing the same power supply, so that there's only 2 leads that need to be plugged into the controller. So I did some lighting tests and I wanted to see if you could clearly see that there was 2 eyes inside the crate. And it didn't really translate the way that I thought it would. You couldn't really tell that it was a creature with eyes in there just because of how big the eyes were. So I decided that I wanted to add that linear actuator to really have that creature, the werewolf, kind of come up almost out of the crate so you could actually see the whole mask with the eyes lit up. So just to recap, I added a Boobox Flex. It's a very high quality prop controller. Does not have an onboard amplifier, but it's got MP3 stereo output. And this particular one I purchased was with the DMX control because I needed that for the ambient lighting for the scene. The other thing I added was the Boobox relay board that gives you relays that can handle any voltage, and that serial cable just plugs directly into the Boobox. And again, this is a picture of the linear actuator that I used. And I also upgraded the speakers to these Edifier speakers that I found on Amazon. So I used a program called Director, which only runs on Windows, and I'm a Mac guy, so what I did was on my MacBook Pro, I installed a boot camp version of Windows so that I could run the Director software. So that Boobox is controlling the DMX lights that light the scene. It's also controlling a strobe, as you can see, and it's also outputting the ambient sound and then the animation sound once the prop is triggered. And for the static display, obviously you can see that the creature's eyes are lit up, and it's just playing an Arctic howling wind as the background ambient noise. And in the future, I think what I'll do is I'll animate the eyes during the static display so they're actually blinking. So you can see I'm just using jute netting or erosion control netting for decoration, and I have one DMX par light up in the corner there. The ambient setting is to blue. Once the prop is triggered, it goes to red, and then I have a little bit of a green flood that just stays green during the whole time.